Hi, I'm Kathy Johnson. Welcome to Town Talk. My guest today is author and professional horsewoman, Margaret Beerman. Margaret, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kathy.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I happened to be at one of your workshops that I never thought I would attend. I attended with some skepticism, but I soon learned that in my mind, this gal knew what she was talking about. I'd like you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself because I found your history of being around horses very compelling and interesting.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a third-generation horsewoman. Both my grandfather and my father were the people that folks brought their horses to fix back in the days of the horse and wagon days. And when I was a child growing up, my father was actually old enough to be my grandfather. He was old enough to go through the Great Depression. And his father said, when you raise your children, please teach them as many skills as you can in case we have another depression. And my father loved his horses, so he had the brilliant idea of going out and starting a business of training ponies for children.
Oh.
Because he thought ponies were getting a bad rap being trained by adults, and that's why they were so mean and everything. So that's how I started out. We traveled the tri-state horse show and rodeo circuit, performing and competing and training ponies for children. And they were part of our lifestyle. When I was growing up, we had wood stove for heat, so we trained them to drive single and double, and we pulled in firewood, and we worked with our horses. And then as time went on, we developed the business of training these ponies for children and then introducing the children to the ponies and giving them a half a dozen lessons before they took the pony home, just to make sure that it was a good match and to make sure that what the child wanted to do with the pony matched. We rode English and Western, and we drove. We did all the disciplines, and depending upon what the child was looking for, that's what we would do. As I started out in my career being a horse trainer, I was unfortunate enough to have a pretty bad injury. I broke the transverse process in my back. And at that time, I was lacking in education, and I also was going deaf. So there wasn't really much else in my life that I could do other than horses. The only other thing that I had was music, and with the deafness, that wasn't going to work. A friend of mine said, Margaret, why don't you go see John Lyons? John Lyons is all about safety and horsemanship. She said, why don't you go see John Lyons? So I took a horse that I had started to see John and spent 3 days with him, and I learned more about teaching people really than I did about the horse. And I still had, because of the accident, and I work with fear-based people a lot, people who have been injured or have fallen.
Oh, sure.
I didn't feel after working with John that I got really what I wanted out of it. And what am I going to do with my life? The only thing I know how to do is work with horses. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Ray Hunt.
Yes, you've mentioned him before, yes.
Yeah, he's what I consider both Bill and Tom Dorrance. Ray Hunt are the masters of horsemanship in the United States. And it was an interesting story. We were in a huge indoor ring, and there was a 4-year-old horse tied to a fence, and Ray's wife was standing at the gate as people brought their horses up, and they would go in the ring, and she'd say, take the halter off and let them go. A few people had a little problem with that because I think there was 23 horses at that clinic.
Wow.
And then towards the end, a couple came up and said to Caroline, the one thing we want to get out of this clinic is our horses are herd bound. We can't, if my wife wants to ride, my horse goes crazy if we leave him in the pasture, and if we're riding and she wants to go over there and I want to go over here, the horse doesn't behave. And so Caroline said, okay, let them go. And then Ray came in. Well, Ray had just gotten out of the hospital with an emphysema attack, and he had an oxygen tank on his back. And he moved a little faster than a turtle. And he walked up to the 4-year-old horse who was tied to the fence and got his bridle on and just lifted his hand, and the horse side passed over to the fence, and Ray got on and got himself adjusted and put his microphone on and took a hold of the flag, and he said, okay, let's see what kind of trouble we can get into. And he backed the horse up and did a perfect quarter turn and galloped out to the center of the arena and stopped and started snapping the flag, and all of the horses went every which way. It took about 20 minutes. His horse didn't get out. Maybe a little bit of a canter here and there, but mostly a walk and a trot with his flag.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept moving the horses around. It took all of 20 minutes. And at the end of 20 minutes, Ray sat on his 4-year-old quarter horse, and 23 horses stood in a semicircle around him.
Oh my goodness.
Just saying, what would you like me to do next? And the 2 horses that were herd bound, there was one on this end of the line and one on that end of the line. And he said, okay, you can come in and catch them up now. And that's how the clinic began. And my jaw dropped. I'm a 3rd-generation horseman. I've ridden English, I've ridden Western, I've driven. I've done just about everything there is to do with a horse.
Right.
And I thought I knew what I was doing. Well, I knew a real lot, but I didn't really know what I needed to know. And I understood that day that that's what I needed to know to be safe. Is this man understood horses so well. What he accomplished in such a short amount of time. It changed my life, and it enabled me to go back into the horse industry and do what I do now, which is to help people train their own horses, to understand the horse as a species,
Right.
to understand his culture and his language. And the other thing about the horsemanship that I have to mention is what these masters teach is the most humane method I've ever seen in teaching a horse or training a horse to do something. We have all sorts of appliances and gimmicks and tie-downs and draw reins and
Oh yes.
bidding rigs and different things like that we use on horses. Ray's way was a natural way. It was get to the horse's mind through his feet.
That's a new concept for me, having been around horses, yes.
You mentioned that was the one thing that was totally different than what you had seen.
That's exactly right. And the other thing that's always been a problem was, you mentioned the herding instinct. One of my problems with one of my horses was if I was taking him too far away from the barn in a direction where other horses were going the opposite, he didn't want to go. He wanted to be with the herd. Very, very difficult. I think people have a hard time with that. And also not understanding how a horse thinks. That was something that you mentioned.
That's right.
I want to ask you, how old were you when you first worked with your dad? You were
4.5.
4.5.
4.5.
I wanted you to say that because I wanted our audience to realize that how long you've been around horses. And I noticed, too, that in your story, there were many different ways you prepared a pony for an owner. Mm-hmm. But you evolved through the years into the method that you use, and I mentioned you as an author, and I want to mention to our audience that Margaret has a book, The Better Deal, which I have read and find very compelling, in which I am taking lessons on that, learning how to work with your horse from the ground, watching his feet. It's very new to me. I, as a child, had a passion for horses, and when you mentioned the ponies, I want to just say this to our audience and to you, Margaret. I asked Santa Claus every single year for a pony. And,
we all did.
Yes, and I didn't get one. But as a woman, when I entered my 40s, I purchased my first horse. Mm-hmm. And then later on, I purchased a yearling, appendix registered quarter horse, and raised him to saddle. Got on him when he was close to 4 years old, very close, and also had him for 12 years. This was all new to me, and I found your workshop very compelling when you started to talk more about horses. I just want to read the something in your book here. The dedication in Margaret's book. This book, to me, and I've read very many horse books, but this was really very interesting and very new to me. First of all, the dedication is, "To the horse who helped me realize you never stop learning." And I'll go to the back page, and you might want to extrapolate on that a little if you want, or go on with more of your information. And then I'm going to start out with the dedication, but I'm also going to go to the end in the conclusion. And this is wonderful. "There's nothing more satisfying than developing a willing partnership with your horse. Although it takes time and effort in the beginning, in the long run, it is a better deal for you and for your horse." Hence the title, A Better Deal.
A Better Deal, yes.
And we have up on the screen how to contact Margaret, and if you want to know more about her book and her workshops, you can contact her that way. But please go on, Margaret, because I know there's much more from your workshop that you presented, so I will bring it back to you.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you just read. I never stop learning. I never do. Every horse I meet is just like meeting people. They're all different. They all have different personalities. There's different breeds. And the fact that it's if you decide to study horsemanship, the approach is different because it's not about how fast we can get you to ride and be able to enter an event. It's more about, if you want to form a partnership with your horse, a lasting partnership, and more than anything else, a safe partnership with your horse, taking the time to learn about the horse as a species.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a person. It's not a human. And what I've done over the last 3 years is develop a program, and it focuses on the horse-human relationship and the differences between the horse and the human. The horse's culture is based on linear hierarchy, and many people shy away from that, or they're not too sure about that, but that's what the horse understands.
Mm-hmm.
And also his language. We have, how many different ways do we have to communicate? We're communicating now with all kinds of people. We have the telephone, we have texting. The difference in the way a horse communicates, he has body language,
Mm-hmm.
he has vocalization.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have? We have more than that. And the other thing is how fast a horse processes information. There's a timing difference when you're communicating with the horse. It takes 2 seconds for that horse to process all the information.
That's interesting, the timing, yes.
And those are the things that I take the time to teach the people. And if people want to learn that, and they learn, it's like one of the analogies I use is, what if somebody dropped you off in the middle of Japan, and you had to find a place to eat, you had to find work, and you had to find a job, and you didn't understand the language? How confusing would that be to you?
Very.
Well, with a horse, it's times 10,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a different species. So my feeling is that we don't really spend enough time understanding what the horse is, because we start along with the horse, and then over a period of time, once we get to know the horse, or we do certain things with the horse, we begin to take things for granted.
Yes.
And we begin to develop that relationship with the horse like he's our best friend, which he is, but also like he's a person, not a horse. And those are the things I help people with. I try to get them to take a little bit different approach. I've developed the program in teaching about the horse. I've gone even further than what I've covered in the book. And I teach 4 basic skills in horsemanship. The first one is the skill of observation, is to let's look at what's really going on, not what we think might be going on. I teach positioning,
Yes.
which we've worked a little bit with that, and that's very important. It's where you're standing in relationship to your horse, or what you're doing on your horse's back has a big effect on how the horse processes the information you're giving him.
Mm-hmm.
I teach communication and how a horse communicates and the timing of the communication with the horse. And I teach emotional intelligence, because that's the one thing that really interferes with communication with your horse.
Explain emotional intelligence. That sounds a little complicated to me.
It sounds a little complicated. I like to use the white the white room analogy. If you're sitting in a little room with your friend, a little white room, and there's just one door, one way out, and your friend is sitting in the chair, and say your friend is deaf, and all of a sudden you hear the fire alarm go off, and you have to get your friend out of the room. Just think about what that would look like. You're frightened. You're in a hurry. You have to get her out of there. Mm-hmm. And then change the scene to the same. You're sitting in the room with your friend, and you're both getting ready for a blind date.
Okay.
And there's a knock on the door. Well, then you have to get up and go to the door.
Right.
And just think about how that looks. Mm-hmm. And then you're sitting in the same room with your friend again, and you just found out that your friend stole your horse and sold it. And you don't want her in that room anymore. You're very angry. And think about what that looks like. So you take all three of those scenes and look at how your body moves.
Uh-huh.
Think about the way your voice sounds.
Right.
And those are the two main ways that a horse communicates, is through body language and vocalization. Uh-huh. So your horse has excellent observational skills. He's governed by instinct. We're governed by emotion. Mm-hmm. So your horse sees the way you're moving and listens to your voice. And the whole idea is to get your horse to follow your lead and do what you want. And he's looking at you, say, if you're very frightened, mm-hmm. and your movements are jerky or quick, or if you're very timid and not sure, or if you're very angry, the horse isn't really going to want to be with you.
I see. So you are the horse is a reflection of your emotion, of the human's emotion.
Right.
Because I read there that in some of my readings, I think in your book too, I read that a horse is an animal that is preyed upon, mm-hmm. and that the only way they protect themselves is to flee.
That's right.
Or kick.
That's right.
And so that's something that I had to learn about a horse myself.
Right, and that's why I teach the 4 basic characteristics. The first and foremost is self-preservation, or what they call the fear-flight instinct.
Right.
And that's why if a horse is observing a human and observing that they're not really moving in the right way, the first thing they're going to do is take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to want to get involved in that because it doesn't look right, it doesn't feel safe, they can't follow it or understand it, so they're not going to be very willing to be relaxed and go with the person if the person is displaying that type of behavior.
I see.
Okay, the second basic characteristic is your pecking order. Where do I belong in the herd? And because the horse is a prey animal, he's also a herd animal. Mm-hmm. And he needs to know where he belongs in the herd, so he needs to know who he can look to when he needs to look to them.
And you are that herd leader.
If you're the human needs to develop that role as the herd leader, so the horse will look to him. In order to do that, you need to be able to communicate that with that horse in a way that makes him kind of want to listen to you, not get away from you.
That brings me to a question that maybe our listeners, especially those who have first purchased a horse or have only been around horses for a small amount of time, overcoming that fear factor of being around a horse. It's a big animal. Mm-hmm. A human being is naturally could have fear of that horse, especially if that human hasn't learned what you're trying to teach. And then that fear, for instance, I fell off a horse at a canter, mm-hmm. in my 40s. I now have fear of cantering. Mm-hmm. It's hard to overcome a fear, and if a horse has scared you, or the horse, usually what happens is the horse is frightened of something, and then you get frightened too,
right?
Along with the horse.
It's like gasoline on the fire.
Yeah. So then what happens is, well, this horse I'm with and myself, if I
Right.
were thinking like a horse, that horse is upset. I must have to be up. Now we've. How do you? You mentioned how you teach people who have fear sometimes.
Right.
What do you say about that?
Well, that goes back years ago when I was a child too, because one of the ways we promoted the business was we had a trick riding act in the rodeo.
Oh.
And when I was first learning, I fell.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't want to get back again. I didn't want to do it again. I think I was 6 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my father sat me down and spoke with me, and he called me Margaret Ann.
Margaret Ann.
Margaret Ann. When it was serious, it was always Margaret Ann. I knew
Okay.
when that second name came that it was very serious. And he said, "Sweetheart, fear is nothing but ignorance." And I didn't quite understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Ignorance is not knowing.
Right.
And if you don't know about something, you should be afraid of it. And you're a very smart little girl, because you don't really know what's going on or why that happened, and that's why you're afraid, right?" And I said, "Yes, I don't want it to happen again." He said, "Well, what we're going to do is we're going to learn about that."
Oh.
And that's how I developed my program. Then he broke, he was rushing me along because I was very athletic as a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
We slowed down and we took the time, and he broke everything that I was going to do down into parts, and we would rehearse the parts up to a certain point and stop, and then the next day we'd rehearse, and then we would add a step. And before you know it, I was doing the hippodrome stand on my pony, and I wasn't afraid anymore because I understood what I was doing. And that's what I try to tell people as far as the horsemanship goes. It takes work and time in the beginning. But if you invest that time in learning about the horse, how a horse moves, his culture, how he communicates, if you learn all of that in the beginning, and you learn how to move a horse, and you learn how to look at your situation, your horse-human relationship from his perspective,
Right.
from the horse's perspective, then you can relax. You go along at a pace where before you know it, you're doing fun things with your horse again. You're having fun again. You don't have your heart in your throat, and you're not so afraid.
Well, yes, and that makes a lot of sense to me. Something that came to my mind when you were speaking was people will say, "I'm going to go learn how to horseback riding.
Right.
I'm going to go learn horseback riding."
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you've stressed, correct me if I'm wrong, because we've only known each other a few weeks, but the difference between horsemanship and horseback riding. I find that interesting. Would you like to break that down?
Sure. Whether you're horseback riding or driving, it doesn't matter. Horsemanship is not about being on your horse.
Not about being on the horse.
No, it's about being with
the horse.
the horse. And I say to people, wouldn't you like to have a little bit better idea of what you're climbing up on before you go off? And the horse business, you have trained horses. And when you go to learn how to ride, you have a school horse, or you have a good old horse that will take care of you.
Right.
Which you found out sometimes that good old school horse that
I rode, yes.
he's not going to take care of you.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And that's, we say that to get people to overcome the fact that it's a big animal. We want to get them on. We want to help them ride, and so on and so forth. The problem is the horses, and one of the things that I teach is a basic fact about a horse is a creature of habit. A horse can think of one thing at a time. There are certain things about the horse, if you don't learn before you get up there, you're not going to have the knowledge it takes to take care of yourself when the horse feels he has to take care of himself. And because the horse is a prey animal, he can be very well trained, extremely well trained, extremely quiet, extremely old. But if something happens, if a horse smells or senses danger, he hears something he doesn't understand or he's unsure, he can't help himself. He's got to move his feet. He's got to move. He's a prey animal. And those are the times when He can't take care of you because he's only doing the thing that he can do, and that's taking care of
His
himself.
Self-preservation.
Right. And that's generally the spook, when a horse spooks. People would bring their horses to me saying, you know, he's fearful, he spooks at everything, can you help him so he doesn't spook at things? And I said, okay, this is what we do. I can teach your horse how to handle his fear. And you can teach your horse how to handle his fear. You can teach your horse how to look to you when something fearful happens. But you cannot teach your horse not to spook. It's like saying to you, Kathy, you're never ever going to be afraid ever again in your lifetime.
Right.
That's unrealistic. You can't control all of that. But what you can do is you can teach your horse to look to you for direction. And we do that through teaching. Let me first finish the basic characteristics for self-preservation, pecking order, where you belong in the herd. Laziness is a basic characteristic of a horse, and your reproduction. So I teach those four things. Then we move over to the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, is I teach the 4 basic herd rules. And this is based on the horse's culture and linear hierarchy of the horse and how they interact in a herd. You can study wild horses, mustangs, or if you're fortunate enough to live next to a horse farm that has general turnout when they turn their horses out in a herd, you can observe things that will show you this. And the first rule in the herd is acknowledgement. You really need to have your horse acknowledge you before you try to do anything. And that's simply because, and this is a fact, all of these things are facts. They're not like Margaret Beerman's way of teaching horsemanship. They're based on actual facts.
Yes.
And a horse needs to acknowledge you before you ask your horse to do anything, because simply he can only think of one thing at a time.
So he could be standing there lazy, ignoring you. He has to know your presence.
Right. He should know your presence. And not only that, you're being respectful of the horse. You're respecting the horse by getting his acknowledgement before you ask him to do something. Rather than to just, if he's doing whatever he's doing and you want to go for a walk, just walk off and expect him to follow you or pull on the rope. Why don't you just raise your hand and say, hey, would you like to go for a walk? And give him the opportunity to go with you without being pulled. So you need to have the acknowledgement first, simply because he can only think of one thing at a time. If his attention is over here, he's not going to be, his attention isn't going to be on you. The second thing is respect. And he can't respect you if he's not acknowledging you.
I see.
So it's taught in order. The herd rules go in order. First, develop the acknowledgement, then you develop the respect. And in horse language, in horse culture, the way that respect is taught, the way that balance is taught, raising the youngsters are taught in the herd, is through respect.
I see.
They're taught not to interfere with the herd boss. Okay, they're taught to ask before they approach. And that's how a person can teach a horse how to balance without all of the appliances. Is to teach them through respect to stand on their own 4 feet, to not push on you or to not pull on you.
Come into your space,
Right.
or anything like that.
And along with that, when we're trying to develop that between the horse and human, we break it down even further into the 4 quarters of the horse. Because what a horse experiences on the left-hand side, he doesn't experience on the right.
Oh, I remember you saying that. Yes.
Right. And
he sees differently.
And a horse will move differently if you're instructing him in the front quarter. He'll move differently than if you're instructing him from the rear quarter. So going back to the 4 basic skills, I teach positioning because it's important for the person to be aware and conscious of what quarter they're in when they're handling a horse, because that's going to determine pretty much how that horse is going to move. So we teach respect in all 4 quarters. So acknowledgement is the first, then respect. The third herd rule is move when I say move, which also means, wait, I didn't ask you to move yet. And that's a biggie for people, because they begin to take a very well-trained horse for granted, and the horse will move off before they're ready. I see that a lot, and I'm very strict at mounting blocks. Your horse has to stand still while he's being mounted. He has to stand still while you adjust your stirrups. He has to stand still until you're ready to gather things up and go off.
Well, how many times have you heard, hold your thought, how many times have you heard of someone buying their child a horse so they can be in horse shows, very well trained, push-button horse, the kid gets in the show, in a few weeks the horse has fallen apart, has to go back to the trainer again, simply because of what you just described.
Right, and that's the biggest reason why, going back to my childhood, my father wouldn't sell a pony to a family unless the family came 6 times. It's usually between 4 and 6 times they came. They had a visit. They learned how to catch the pony. They learned how to groom the pony. They learned how to put the tack on the pony. They learned all sorts of things before they took the pony home. And it's lots of times people will take riding lessons, and they do learn a lot about the horse, but they learn a lot about riding. But there's a lot that's missing there. And because a horse is a creature of habit, and this is the other thing I'm very strict about, is a horse, because of the way the equine brain is structured, the horse does not know the difference between a good habit and a bad habit.
Once he learns it, it's...
Right, and this is why. Because of the linear hierarchy, because of the way the equine brain is set up, and because of their culture, the only thing the horse knows is if the behavior was allowed, it's acceptable.
Yes, and that is something I learned early on with horses, was that horses don't forget. If something bad has happened, now you've got a real problem of how to not let that happen anymore. It's wonderful that they remember, because when you teach them something well, that's there, but if it's bad, they have a memory.
And I run into that a lot. The mainstay of my business is nobody else can do anything with this horse or whatever. Can you do something with it? And the bad things that happen. I grew up originally with what they called the Beery method. And the Beery method of training horses was a very slow, steady, gradual way to get the horse to come along. But then something would happen. The horse would get away, the horse would spook, the horse would whatever. And then you would have to bring these appliances out and break the bad habit.
Yeah.
And lots of times that involved putting appliances down, throwing a horse on the ground, doing the whole desensitizing thing, and running W's and things like that. And I've done all that before. And I have to say, there are situations when a horse has gotten so far gone, you have to go back there, because he's a very large animal.
As much as you don't want
to. And it's ingrained in him because he is a prey animal, and they're governed by instinct. Again, they're governed by instinct, not emotion. And if a horse doesn't feel safe, or a horse doesn't understand, there's only 2 things he's going to do. He's either going to try to get away. That's the fear flight. The first thing he tries to do is get away from whatever it is that might hurt him. If that doesn't work and he's confined, he's going to try to get rid of. That's when he runs over, that's when he bucks, that's when he rears, that's when he kicks. He does all that because he can't get away.
That's his only other defense.
Right. So, from a horsemanship standpoint, we don't break bad habits. When somebody comes to me with a horse that kicks, I don't try to break the kicking habit. What I do is I practice horsemanship, I establish my place in the herd through the herd rules. And what that does is it establishes a new habit in the horse to follow, for the horse to follow. And what it is yielding the hind quarter, is respecting me when I step into the rear hind quarter, and yielding that hind quarter away from me when I ask for it. That's all I do. I don't discipline the horse. I don't, and I think we had a conversation about this once, is the difference between the learning how to ride, or the training, riding, instructing, and the horsemanship, is in horsemanship we don't correct bad habits.
That's right.
If you have to correct something, that means it's already gone south, it's already gone bad, and you have to fix it. In horsemanship, we direct and redirect. So it's not about correction, it's about direction. And if you do the groundwork with the horse, you learn that things don't happen all at once with a horse. A horse actually arranges himself. He gets ready to do things, to make that move that bucked you off, or to
Watch
make
the
that
feet.
move. Watch the feet. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, which is something that was very hard for me to do after I attended your workshop and I started to work with my instructor who uses your methods. Very difficult for me to watch the feet
Right.
and to watch the positions like that. The other difficult thing is you have to think about it. And this is what I had to do. I'm anxious to get up on the horse I'm working with.
Of course.
I'm anxious to do that. On the other hand, I would want to tell people like myself in my listening audience that I think patience is a virtue. I think that I may, even though I've ridden before through the years, I'm probably going to be spending at least a year or many, many weeks with this groundwork, and which is laid out in your book, The Better Deal, which I read before I go to my class and all, and try to get it in my head. I found it harder than I ever thought it would be, where to put my hands, where to put my body, how to communicate with the horse and all. Very, very, very difficult and awkward for someone who has not done that. But I have decided that I'm serious and I'm going to be patient with that situation. But it is a long process.
It is. It is. I tell people when you want to learn horsemanship, it doesn't mean you can't ride. What you do is you can learn as you go along. I have many people that come to me that have ridden for 20, 30 years, and now they want to learn the groundwork. And through learning the groundwork, they develop a much better relationship with their horse. They develop more control over their horse. They have a lot less fear and can trail ride and do the things that they want to do with their horse because they feel as if now their horse is looking to them for direction. They take that responsibility as the herd leader, and that's the one thing, is it is a responsibility. You can take a very well-trained horse and put an uneducated person on that horse, and inside of a week or two, you can have a very untrained horse.
That's right. They can fall apart very quickly.
That's right.
Very, very quickly.
So, and the quick way, if you want to study horsemanship, I tell people it takes about 2 years of study to become a good old average horse handler. And what the knowledge you've gained in that 2 years will be with you the rest of your life, and you'll be able to apply it to any horse because it's universal.
Yes.
It's not just dressage or just Western pleasure or just driving. It's not a discipline. What people don't understand, that's why I'm not a horse trainer. Most trainers are discipline specific. You go to your dressage trainer, or you go to your eventing trainer, you go to your Western pleasure trainer, you go to your driving trainer to learn how to do those things, to learn how to do that with the horse. What I do is I teach you about the horse. How long does it take to develop a good relationship with a horse?
Yes.
And how long does it take to learn about when people ask me that, I say, how long does it take to learn to develop a good relationship with a horse? Well, how good a relationship do you want? How much do you want to learn about the horse? It took me 3 years, so I give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm a third-generation horsewoman, but when I decided to study this, I felt it was 3 years before I was solid enough in what I was doing that I could teach it to people. And what you're doing is you're learning, it's a different species. Yeah. How long do you give yourself to get to know the person, your life partner that you want to spend your life with?
Right. That's right. And something came to my mind, too, that you said working from the ground. Well, when I had my yearling, and I mentioned this to you before, my yearling, I did everything from the ground because obviously he wasn't old enough to carry a rider. And I wanted to go by the old school of the Lipizzaners, where they wait a very long time before they even start getting the horse trained and on the back. I think very close to my horse's 4th birthday is when I got up on his back for the first time, very uneventfully, which was good, from the ground. But when I thought about training from the ground, I thought about just doing what you do as a rider from the ground,
Right.
okay, so that the horse understood, because his back wasn't strong enough to carry you, so you might as well start training him from the ground. Training from the ground is more for me, I guess. With your method, I mean, and helping the horse understand what you want from him.
Right.
And the other thing I wanted to bring out, because I think our audience was probably thinking of this, so I wanted to differentiate training from the ground. Training from the ground, the way you're teaching, is different. It's what you're learning about the horse and what he needs too, correct?
Right.
To some extent. But where was I going with this?
Probably the difference, the question I get, one question I get a lot is, what does this have to do with, I want to ride my horse.
That's right.
What
Why
is
do
this?
I have to do this?
Why do I have to do this? Well,
I've ridden before.
right. Your horse develops, you and your horse develop an understanding of each other. Your horse begins to understand that you're the herd leader. Isn't that a nice feeling to have before you get in the saddle?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing that happens is the groundwork that I teach is made up of 5 basic moves. It's called circle work. And those 5 basic moves are back straight, yield the front quarter, move forward softly, move forward willingly, softly to me, disengage your hind quarter, and stop straight.
Right.
And those 5 moves, if you can get your horse to do those with you on the ground, then I put you in the saddle and you do them from the saddle. And those 5 moves are the only thing, they're the basic foundation of high school dressage.
There you have it. Let me do something for my audience right now,
Okay.
in front of you. You say acknowledge the horse. I'll bet some people listening want to know what that means. Well, I'm going to do this in front of Margaret and the audience and probably make a fool of myself. But I did learn that you acknowledge the horse by raising your hand, getting his attention. Hello.
Right.
Hello. Hello, horse. Here I am.
Right.
Okay. Then, after that, what was the other one? The next thing after you acknowledge?
Acknowledge, respect.
Respect. Okay. Well, I'm going to skip over, but what we do is, my hand is up. I've acknowledged my horse, and then I start to move my wrist back in the rhythm. He knows at that point, I have my flag in my hand sometimes, but he should know at that point that I'm asking him to back up. And one of the things I learned quickly was, well, I'm standing there with the horse and I'm going, and the horse is like, what do you want, what do you want? All of a sudden I learn that from the young woman at the barn, it's a roller coaster. You're going up, then you're going down. All of a sudden, it dawns on me, watch the feet, back, 1 foot move, back, back. Every time a foot moved, ask again. Every time he listened, you reinforce, release, reinforce. To him, he listened, let go, then reinforce. Then he knows every time you do this, it's time for him to move. But if you just keep going like this and shaking the rope, he says, well, what do you want from me?
That's timing.
Timing. My timing, yes, timing is everything. As a political animal and been in politics, timing is everything in this world. And my timing. Very, very, I want our audience to understand that at first this seems very difficult.
It does.
And at first it seems like, what am I doing? Is this a waste of time? But I have learned so much from your method. I have to say I highly recommend anyone interested to pay attention to the fact that you have the book out and that you do workshops. And we do have your email address up on there and the cover of the book, just to let them know. But Margaret, please go on because we have more time. And so I'm learning, and I'm finding it very difficult to coordinate myself for the horse. I mean, put your hand here, put your position there, use your hand this way. One of my hardest things is to yield the front, the forehand, to yield.
It's the hardest. It's the hardest
hard.
of the moves.
You're off to the side, on the angle, back, 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 and as soon as the leg furthest from you comes forward, and it's so quick, it's back, and then you move toward the horse. To do that smoothly, this is Kathy Johnson, audience, back, 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 and I'm trying to, okay, and I'm like I'm on a football field, bum rushing the horse, it's, I'm still getting my timing and still trying to get it back, back, back.
Yeah, and that's as you're going along and applying that, you're learning emotional intelligence.
Yes.
You're learning that because it's so exciting to be with this beautiful animal, this beautiful large animal, and you want so badly for this animal to do it. You want to be with it. You want to do all these things, and that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. You get anxious.
Yes.
And when you get anxious, your movements change.
That's right.
And when your movements change, your timing is off. And when your timing is off, it doesn't come together. And we have a lot of fun. We have an awful lot of fun practicing and getting that to come together. And the difference is, too, you said it's very difficult. It is. And the reason it is because riding is a sport.
Yes.
Horsemanship is a skill set.
It's an art.
And horsemanship is made up, I just teach 4 basic skills. There's many other skills that go along with that. But it's learning a skill is hard, and you have to learn it through application, which means you're going to make lots of mistakes. And one of the things that Ray said that I use an awful lot, especially with new students starting out to get frustrated, is, you know something? It's just as important to learn what not to do as it is to learn what to do.
That's exactly right. And I do feel like a child. I said this to my instructor, and I said it to you before too, who instructs, by the way, the same way Margaret does. She's learned from Margaret. I feel like I'm in a square dance, and I'm always the little kid in the room who's going in the opposite direction. I never have. I have a lot of confidence in myself, having been in politics, having been a public speaker, and that. But when I'm doing this new learning on the ground, I feel like a little child who is always. The first grade teacher is saying to me, "No, Kathy, when we're doing this, you go to the right, not the left." That kind of thing. I feel like a child all over again.
Yeah.
We have about 10 more minutes in the show, which is quite a while, but I wanted to remind us of that because I want you to end with on something you really want to say to the audience while you're thinking about it. But we still have 10 minutes is a long time with the show. I have to say I was so pleased that you wanted to come and do this show with me. Horses have been my passion since I was a little girl. I had plastic horses this big where my Barbie dolls rode around on them and were dressed as cowgirls and all. I had that and all. And when I was 32 years old, my husband was on a business trip. It was my birthday. I went to the store in Oxford. My Oxford friends will know this. There used to be a little grocery store in Pleasant Valley years ago when it was a different name. And there was a little barn there that had some horses you could rent to ride. And they had just moved in. So I said, I have to go over to that barn and look at the horses. Well, by the time I left the barn, I had purchased, pending the vetting, the vet looking at the horse, I had purchased an 18-year-old gelding cob. Flea-bit gray. My husband called me from down south and said, "What did you do today?" I said, "I bought a horse." Do you know what 5 minutes of silence is? It's like an eternity on the other end of the phone. And from that moment on, I had that horse. I sold him, which I wish I had not, but I couldn't afford to. I bought the yearling, and my dream was to ride dressage. And I see on your shirt you have U.S. Lipizzan
Yes.
Federation. And I want to say that I'm privileged to be at a barn that has 2 Lipizzaners there, as you well know. And I never thought I'd be working with a Lipizzaner ever in my whole life. It's the thrill of my life. And we don't need to get into this, but I'll mention this one thing to you. I have watched the Lipizzaners, and I think we talked about this on TV, and I've watched them. And I don't mean just the ones that come here to the United States. I mean the ones in Vienna. They do come occasionally, but there are other Lipizzaners that are in the United States. I'm talking about watching the Spanish riding school, how smooth they move in dressage, how they do the piaffe and the passage effortlessly. They don't look like they're all cranked up like mechanical toys. It's so smooth and beautiful. And that is what I'm hoping to learn from what you're teaching, is how to ride like that and get a horse to respond like that. After all, dressage is fairly new to America. The Europeans had it way longer than we did.
Right.
And can you extrapolate a little on that?
Well, I can sum it up in a 4-letter word called time.
Time.
People have to realize that it takes time to develop those kind of things. And if to develop the horsemanship, when I start working with people, I say it's based on mutual respect. If you want your horse to respect you well enough and respect your space and your cues and your aids well enough to respond to you, then you have to respect his limited capacity for understanding human communication and understand his culture and how he processes information, how he thinks. And that takes time.
It does.
And if you take the time to learn that and stop running off and wanting that end goal, the end goal can always be there, but it's the journey that counts. And along the way you will have moments, and when you have moments, you cherish those moments, because as you get to know the horse, and when you reach a certain level with a horse, you look back and you really see how much you have accomplished, because he's not a person, he is a horse.
Now, and the other thing I noticed too was sometimes when I make a mistake and I correct it, redirect, when I make a mistake or something like that, I'll be told, he's forgotten it already. Don't, I feel like maybe, I've upset him.
No, a horse lives in the moment.
Lives in the moment.
And he will associate, and there are certain habits, and what I tell people is if it's not working, don't keep doing it. But that's the importance behind learning how a horse moves and arranges himself and working with him, so that when you start to ask him to do something, you stay with that and don't change your mind halfway through.
Right.
And say, oh no, I didn't ask for it, well let's do this. Then you're confusing your horse. It's one thing at a time. And it's very important to follow through with the horse and stay with him until he does get it, and then release the pressure, because the language we use is pressure and release. And that release of pressure is what tells the horse he did the right thing.
Well, what I'll say to you is, yes, that is a situation where if I'm getting frustrated and it's falling apart for me, where I know what I'm supposed to do, stand in a certain place, and now it's falling apart, and I see that the horse is confused, I stop what I'm doing, and I redirect into something else. I might just do a separation, take a few breaths, stop what I'm doing, and go to something else. And I enjoy the fact, but I shouldn't enjoy it, that he starts anticipating me, the horse I'm working with, and then I say, well, look, this is great. He knows, and yet we don't want that anticipation. And that happened to me when I was raising my horse. That horse did everything I wanted because he anticipated everything, and he wasn't really listening to me.
Right.
And I'm learning that. I'm learning something all the time.
You're learning how to develop that relationship with a horse, not just have it happen by doing one certain thing. There's a lot of, it's called feel, timing, and that's how you get balance.
Well, and that's it. Now, we have about a little over 4 minutes left of our show. Oh, we have 1 minute left of our show. Margaret, would you like to say something about how often you have your workshops and how to reach you? You have we have your email address
Right.
up there. You do several workshops all the time in the state.
And at my place, once every other week, every other Saturday.
Uh-huh.
I have on Saturday mornings from 10 to 12.
Right.
I hold a workshop, and then I'm available to go to other barns or go wherever I'm needed.
Wherever you're needed. Now, where is your barn? It's a little over the New York line.
I'm in Millerton, New York.
Right up by Sherman, right? Or New Milford? How?
No, that's Sharon.
Sharon, that's what I meant.
Yeah, Sharon, Connecticut.
Yeah, you're up that way, right over the line. And I want my viewers to realize, it's right up on the screen. I looked away from it. It's right up on the screen right now, all your information, and we'll leave it up there for about 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to tell my producer that we're ready to say goodbye. Margaret, it was a real pleasure for me to speak with you. I hope you come back again. I hope that people take time to seek out your book, take time to look at your website and your email. We've had it up there. I want to just say I'm all set to say goodbye. I just want to say to our audience, this is Kathy Johnson telling you all to have a wonderful day and a better tomorrow. Hope to see you again soon. Bye. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.